Good morning. Well, it's morning when I'm recording this, and if you're listening to this on Friday morning when it comes out, good morning. If it's not morning, good afternoon. This is episode 8 of Misdiagnosed, and I think it's going to be my best yet, mostly because it hits really close to home. And if you haven't listened to the first episode, you might want to listen to that first because it kind of sets the stage for where we are now. I'm somewhat going in succession with these episodes, but kind of let the universe tell me which subject is the next subject. I think it's time to address bipolar disorder because it keeps popping up. I've personally been diagnosed with it 6 times. Hold on, let me correct myself. I've been misdiagnosed with it 6 times because now I know what was actually happening, and I'm going to share that with you. It was not what they said it was. I hear about it as like an identity thing. Like there's a comedian named Taylor Tomlinson. She's really funny. She got a bit in one of her stand-up shows where she says, I'm bipolar, and she does a really good job of normalizing that and saying it's like having to wear swimmies in the pool. To me, while I really respect that she's trying to help people feel better about their diagnosis, I also feel sad because if she knew how powerful she actually was and she didn't have to define herself by an illness that has a known cause, then she wouldn't have to define herself like that. Some people find comfort in that because then they can say, it's not my fault, it's my brain. And the truth is, it isn't your fault. It is your brain. But what annoys me the most about bipolar disorder, and I've got some notes and I've got 4 books open that I've been referencing. I've got the American Handbook of Psychiatry, Volume 1. This is in the 1960s. It's a 3-volume set. This is when bipolar disorder was called manic depressive disorder. Then I have the Modern Synopsis of Comprehensive Textbook of Psychiatry 4, the 4th edition. It is referring to manic depressive psychosis now as bipolar disorder. That's something to think about, is just the evolution of the names. Of course, the DSM-II refers to it as manic depressive reaction. All of the disorders were called manic depressive reaction. So I have some interesting things to share with you from that front as well. The evolution of the term. But bipolar disorder hits really close to home for me because I had people labeling me as bipolar. Like my emotions had been suppressed for so long, y'all. I was not aware of it, and neither was anybody else because I had gotten that good and people had seen this docile version of me, this people-pleasing version of me, workaholic version of me who never let her feelings show and never expressed her distaste, or very rarely did. And then when I did, it was like, whoa, like, wow, kind of thing. Like, and that happens to a lot of women where we express ourselves and then usually it's older men, I'm not going to name any names, but father-in-law would seem somewhat offended when you actually stood up for yourself and said, stop making fun of me. Like, it's not okay, like setting a boundary. And yeah, it's been a journey, but also my excessive use of cannabis to self-medicate to help me deal with the uprising in emotions, it just increased my emotions. And in some ways, I am grateful for that period of my life, even though it was scary and even though it was, landing me in the mental hospital a few times because I was doing things to express myself that were not seen as normal or healthy by people who think they're normal and healthy, right? But I'm grateful because it brings so much stuff to the surface that you haven't been dealing with. And even though the mental hospitals were disgusting facilities, I learned a lot about the system. Like, how could I have this podcast if I hadn't been on the inside so many times? You know what I mean? I wouldn't be here today doing this right now and sharing this information with you as enthusiastically and with firsthand experience if I hadn't had firsthand experience. And so for that, I'm incredibly grateful. And I think I'm going to share with you my long list of diagnoses. Overall, I have been diagnosed with acute psychosis and possible schizophrenia, for which I would need lifelong care. And that is flashing back to October of 2018 when I first landed in the mental hospital because people tricked me into going there. I've gotten over the anger from that, but it was really angry that people weren't honest with me about how they're feeling like they had to trick me into going someplace and they weren't seeing what was really happening. But that's not their fault, right? Everybody has a certain frequency. Everybody's experiencing reality in a certain way. And so if they have like a lower fear frequency, they're going to think, oh my God, she's got this disease that I've been seeing on TV and she might need one of the drugs that I've been seeing on TV, you know. But the bitterness didn't come from being in the mental hospital. It was about being left there and having to beg my ex-husband to come back. He was still my husband at the time, and I couldn't get out of the mental hospital without him, and having to beg him to come back because he'd gone all the way back home to Florida. And I was really, really pissed about that, like extremely pissed. Of course, that kind of emotional betrayal led to a lot of emotions coming out, and I felt like I had been suppressing my feelings, my real feelings about my husband for so long, because we had been polyamorous for a year and he was seeing someone else, and that's why he was leaving, because he wanted to be with her and was, you know, I was tired of dealing with my crap. And, you know, for better or for worse, only works when you don't have alternatives, apparently. But I was so relieved. I was balancing like this feeling of betrayal, but also feeling like really happy because I didn't want to be married to him anymore. But I had said, I'll never leave you. On a subconscious level, I was wanting to stick to that and do the right thing. But in retrospect, and having learned so much about how I was betraying myself, I should have left as soon as I realized, whoa, I married the wrong person. But I wasn't letting myself see that. So looking back and wishing you'd done things differently is like saying, I should have been a different person. And it's not logical because you weren't a different person. You were you. There's no sense in feeling shame about your past because you were who you were at that moment and you need to be that person and you did the best you could with what you knew. I felt very justified in sharing my rage with the world because, hey, if you owned a business and you built the business and then your ex-husband throws you in a mental hospital, leaves you there and tries to take that business, you're going to get mad about it. So I have no regrets, and I've said that before. I'm like, I really regret nothing about how I handled things because it needed to happen that way. Like, those emotions had to get out. I think when people don't understand that, it's just because they don't understand that. They don't understand how much I was suppressing and how much I was lying to myself to keep him happy and how utterly betrayed I felt when the gaslighting happened with the doctors. I mean, my ex-husband told everybody that I probably had schizophrenia. That was a complete violation of my privacy. I didn't even know that. Sort of come out and 6 months later, not even know that he had sent that email to everyone, find it. Of course I'm going to be pissed about it. And of course I'm going to see him as public enemy number one, as I've said before. So anyway, that was my first diagnosis and a little background. Then I got diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder with psychotic features. Gravely disabled was on one of my records. Generalized anxiety disorder, that was from my general practitioner, but I didn't know that general practitioners aren't qualified to give out psychiatric diagnoses, according to industry of psychiatry anyway, right? What kind of credibility is that? But she also diagnosed me with panic disorder. She didn't officially diagnose me with bipolar 2 disorder, but I got diagnosed with that a couple of times. And that was a diagnosis, interestingly enough, that was invented, just like bipolar disorder, to lower the threshold and allow more people to be diagnosed with it so they could prescribe more drugs. Another interesting fact about the drug therapies that are available for bipolar disorders is that they're actually antipsychotics, but they've been marketed as mood stabilizers. They are, to a T, exactly like antipsychotics. They work exactly the same, but they give it names like Abilify, and they call it a mood stabilizer, so it's easier to swallow the idea of being on one. Like, oh, I just need a mood stabilizer. What that does is it completely numbs you out. It just makes you apathetic, and if you're not taking care of the underlying cause of the upheaval of neurotransmitters in your brain, then the drug's just going to make you worse. So post-traumatic stress disorder, that one I can actually agree with, even though, none of the disorders are actually real. You can't see PTSD on a brain scan. You can't see bipolar disorder. You can't see anxiety. You can't find it. There's no test for it. But the symptoms of having experienced stress following a trauma, that's the most accurate description out of all of them that I received. I also received a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder unspecified. Unofficially ADHD, that was put on ADHD medication, and then a rare form of blood cancer called essential thrombocythemia, which Y'all, if you've been diagnosed with anything, request your records from the doctor and read them. I can just tell you that I'm so grateful I did that, because once I actually saw the records from my bone marrow biopsy, it didn't even definitively say that I had what my hematologist oncologist was actually telling me I had. It said it supported the diagnosis of a different disorder that is not showing up at all. I now know from the other research that I've done, medical medium books, and understanding inflammation, the role of stress on the body, and how viruses can affect the brain and affect the blood system and everything, the immune system in general, that it's very likely that the rare form of blood cancer, essential thrombocythemia, that I was diagnosed with is a sign of inflammation. My bone marrow was increasing the number of platelets, trying to fight off something that the oncologist simply was not aware of. He didn't test me for viruses. It was me who went and got tested for viruses thanks to a psychiatrist when I said, yo, I got insurance now. Please test me for everything that could be causing this insane anxiety that I'm feeling. Just insane. That's when I saw the high Epstein-Barr virus antibodies. Most of the time, doctors will tell you if there's antibodies, then it's just a sign of past infection. But with antibodies that high, what's actually happening is the virus is not in your bloodstream, it's in your organ systems. So it had moved into my thyroid, which explains why I later got diagnosed with a thyroid condition. And it's in your liver, which was explaining why I was gaining weight, slowing down my liver because my liver is trying to protect me from all this crap. So I've been prescribed medications many, many times. I'm going to list out all the ones. I've been prescribed Abilify at least 3 times because I kept getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder. 6 times total. Lexapro, an antidepressant. Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic. Topamax, which is an anticonvulsant. Xanax, which is benzodiazepine. Zyprexa, another antipsychotic. Vistaril, which is a prescription antihistamine, which was trying to lower the histamines in my brain, which were being caused due to the infection that my doctor was unaware of. I'm not taking that anymore. Focalin and Adderall, which are both for ADHD. Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic that my grandmother took when she was in the home with Alzheimer's. They gave her that. And they also gave her Xanax. Propranolol, which is a beta blocker. That was for anxiety. Wellbutrin, which is an SNRI, not an SSRI. So it works similarly to SSRIs, but it affects your norepinephrine instead of serotonin, which is funny because the whole chemical imbalance theory originated from the belief that norepinephrine caused depression. And that's not true, but they're still selling a drug because there's still the possibility that people believe that. There's still a lot of publications. I'm looking at one right now that says some studies have shown that norepinephrine is connected to depression. That's not true. It's been shown to be false, and we know that it's been shown to be false in studies about serotonin as well. Vraylar, it's an antipsychotic. I was prescribed that by a non-insurance taking, but $475 an hour charging psychiatrist, like less than a mile from my house, and didn't take that either. Parnate, which is an MAOI antidepressant, I refused to take that. Mirtazapine and SSRI, I was prescribed that by a doctor in Amsterdam. And then, of course, hydroxyurea, which is the chemo pills that my oncologist and hematologist tried to get me to take to lower my platelet count. The thing with essential thrombocythemia and the excessive platelets in your blood, the main risk is blood clots. But I eat a mostly vegan diet. I jump on my trampoline. I was using my sauna a lot at the time. Like, I'm doing a lot to reduce the propensity, not only to decrease viral load on my body. Sauna is really good for that. And jumping on a trampoline is great for your lymphatic system, but it's great for preventing any potential blood clots. It's a very active lifestyle in comparison to most people who have this disorder that maybe don't. You know, they maybe have co-occurring conditions and they're depressed on the couch and they're not moving. Maybe they're overweight because their liver is overloaded, all this stuff. I have to say, like, you have to be your own doctor. You have to be your own doctor. Follow your gut instinct. I knew when I started getting diagnosed with all this stuff after 30 years of nothing, you don't just suddenly come down with this disorder, but that's what they tell you with bipolar disorder. They tell you that you've probably had it for life and it first shows itself because they act like it's a disease. And once I get into the texts here, I'll share some of what's actually out there information-wise. And what I actually had, even though I got all these diagnoses, I have this in my notes here. Severe emotional distress because of a breakdown of a long-term relationship I entered into when I was still in college. I'd been in a relationship with this guy for 10 years. And I was still a child in my brain when I entered a relationship into him. And I was on the birth control pill. I had sustained periods of substance abuse, mostly marijuana, but later it was alcohol. I got onto marijuana to try to stop alcohol. Now I don't drink, and I rarely ever smoke, only in social situations when I'm not trying to escape reality. I have great conversations with people when I smoke weed. There is a purpose for it. It's all about set and setting. It's not just smoke all the time to make yourself feel better or to make other people more tolerable. The last time I abused marijuana was when I was in a relationship with somebody I couldn't stand, and marijuana made it easier. PTSD from religious upbringing, polyamory, massive betrayal and abandonment by my husband in a mental facility, gaslighting by doctors and friends who believed my doctors over me and encouraged me to accept my diagnosis and try to learn to live with it. Trust your doctor, take your meds. And that caused me to question my perception of myself. Gaslighting is powerful when so many people surrounding you are trying to tell you that this is what's happening and you just need to accept it. Even somebody really close to me said something about needing to accept your mediocrity. I was so depressed by that. It's like, seriously? And that was a period of three years where I got encouragement to accept my diagnosis and it's okay and blah, blah, blah. And I understand that they're trying to make me feel better because they thought that's why I was depressed. But there's a lot of things that you just don't have words. It's kind of like Atlas of the Heart and the role of language and being able to connect with people. And if you don't have language to describe what you're feeling, then it is trapped inside of you and you can't connect to people and share that with people. And it just eats you alive, essentially. I had brain inflammation due to low-grade Epstein-Barr virus infection with cofactor bacteria overgrowth. I also had high antibodies for mycoplasma pneumonia. Oftentimes, bacteria are cofactors to viral infections. How does that happen? It happens because of prolonged emotional stress, lowering your immune system, and allowing bugs that are already in your system that your liver has been thus far successfully able to keep in low numbers. That's what one of your liver's many jobs is, to protect you from viruses and bacteria like that. It allows those viruses to grow and proliferate, and then your symptoms get worse and worse. I also had liver and thyroid inflammation by the Epstein-Barr virus, and that's why they didn't see it in my bloodstream. They only saw the antibodies. But if it was in such high numbers, it would be ridiculous for doctors to say, oh, there's no active infection because it's not in the bloodstream. Well, the virus can get into your organs, and that's not your bloodstream. It's a very smart virus. Viruses are alive. They're just alive in a different way than we are. They don't breathe, right? It's kind of like how fire somehow has a life and an intelligence, even though it doesn't have a brain. It's strange. But all my life, we were taught in school that viruses are dead. They're not alive. And that's simply not true. The neurotoxins and dermatoxins that they excrete when they eat, and they do eat certain foods, they eat things with hormones in them. They eat your own hormones. They love stress hormones. They ate all my cortisol. They were eating the adrenaline pushed out by the Adderall I was taking, the caffeine I was consuming. All that stuff pushes out more hormones from your adrenals, resulting in adrenal fatigue. And there's doctors in the mainstream science community that are saying adrenal fatigue is not real. And that's, we'll have to save that for another episode. I had inflammation in my liver and thyroid, and that resulted in inflammatory responses like severe bloating, really painful gastric distress, high blood markers for inflammation, like the high platelets, which I sincerely believe was misdiagnosed as a cancer. I won't know for certain until I get my blood tested again after a long period, a whole year. I'm giving it a whole year between tests to really implement what I've learned in terms of how to feed my body and to lower my stress levels and give myself time to recalibrate and bring my body back into equilibrium, which should naturally lower the platelet count, and my bone marrow will stop making so much overproducing is essentially what it's doing. Then I also had ADHD symptoms like brain fog, distractibility, irritability, inability to focus, all those things. And I solved those by changes in my environment, including the death of the property manager that was manipulating me. I made changes to my diet to make my body inhospitable to viruses. I did a lot to reduce stress, got off all psychotropic drugs and substances, so no alcohol. I cut way back on weed, like probably go 2 or 3 months in between single instances of smoking. And I don't have my medical card anymore because I just don't want to open that door to just being able to go to a pot shop and get vapor cartridges or anything. I've identified a lot of thought patterns and relationship patterns that were not serving me. I've gotten very organized, and to be honest, Adderall did help with that, especially when my brain wasn't working very well. I've gotten a lot more hydrated, been using hyperbaric oxygen therapy to oxygenate, sauna to detox, which is great. It helped me get over COVID after 3 days. Guided imagery, like doing walking meditations, becoming more present and aware of my surroundings. Floating in the sensory deprivation tank that I have here in my house. I've done that twice. I finally have it set up. I've only had it set up for a week and I've floated twice so far. It's very exciting. But because doctors only get paid for a short amount of time and they only get paid if you get a diagnosis if they're a psychiatrist, very few of them, if any, are going to take the time to dig in and put together the pieces. Only you can do that. Only you can do that. Sure, it's great to have help from doctors. Like, I wouldn't known that I had Epstein-Barr unless I had asked that psychiatrist from Amen Clinics to test me for everything that could possibly be causing anxiety. Before that, I didn't have insurance. So he was very conservative with what he started testing me for, and initially he diagnosed me with a zinc deficiency. But I still had the symptoms, even when I had been taking zinc for a while and my zinc numbers were fine. Even the initial test, my zinc numbers were fine. And the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual ignores the individual's experience. They don't put together the puzzle pieces. It's just pathology based on symptoms. So in my research for bipolar disorder and the evolution of it, I've uncovered a lot of absurdity. We'll start with the National Institute of Mental Health website. If you look up bipolar disorder on that website, it says, and I quote, "The exact cause of bipolar disorder is unknown. However, research suggests that a combination of factors may contribute to the illness." That's so enlightening. But what's crazy is that they also say, and I quote, "Remember," I hate it when people start sentences with "remember," right? Because that's so manipulative. It's like, you should know this. It feels so patronizing. I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't like the way it feels when I read sentences like that on websites like this. It's just like, I'm the doctor, remember. It says, "Remember, bipolar disorder is a lifelong illness, but long-term ongoing treatment can help manage symptoms and enable you to live a healthy life." It's so disgusting. Like, this sentence makes me enraged inside because it's illogical. Okay, so if they have confessed in the beginning of the article that the exact cause of bipolar disorder is unknown, how can they know that bipolar disorder is a lifelong illness if they don't know the cause? Does that even make sense? You can tell that this is a machine powered by drug companies because they're saying long-term ongoing treatment, you need us, can help manage your symptoms. We don't know the cause, but you need to manage your symptoms because there's no way in hell that we're going to find out the underlying cause of it, because if we do know the underlying cause and we tell you what it is, you won't need our long-term ongoing treatment anymore, and we won't need to manage symptoms with our help anymore. You won't need us to enable you to live a healthy life, right? You see what's going on here? How can they know it's a lifelong illness if they don't know the cause? It's illogical because it's not a lifelong illness. I'm reading this textbook from the 1960s, and they knew that even then. So I'm going to share with you some of the information from that book. One of the things I highlighted in this book is literally says, "The illness generally results in recovery as far as the individual attack is concerned. Repeated attacks usually cause very little intellectual impairment." So they say, that recovery is common. And this is a 1960s textbook. So I want to get into a little bit of the history of bipolar disorder. Right now, I'm reading the American Handbook of Psychiatry. I'll tell you exactly when it was published by Basic Books. First printing, October 1959. It was published 10 times between then and 1969. The official copyright is 1959 by Basic Books as a Library of Congress catalog card number. It's old school. It's like a real old book. But it's in great condition. I found it on eBay. Good addition to my library. And bipolar disorder is called manic depressive psychosis. The chapter is actually written by the editor of the book, Silvano Arietti. It says the term psychosis connotes the fact that the psychopathological way of living is, in a certain way, accepted by the patient, no matter what transformation the psychotic patient has undergone. So they consider people with bipolar disorder psychotic, right? It's either a predominantly symbolic transformation, as in schizophrenia, or a predominantly emotional transformation, as in manic depressive psychosis. That transformation becomes his way of relating to people and of interpreting the world. The manic depressive patient does not fight his disorder, but lives in it and is therefore psychotic. There is an admission that the dysfunction is predominantly determined by or connected with an emotional maladaptation. So there's some permanence in that word, maladaptation. If you look up maladaptation as it relates to like personality disorders and things that have been determined to exist by psychiatry as well, maladaptation is something that they believe cannot be fixed. They're citing people from ancient times and using what their beliefs were as facts. It's wild. So they're quoting Zilborg, Yalif. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing any of these names right, but they're basically saying, well, because this was found out in ancient times, this is true. It's just wild. It says, in the writings of Hippocrates, we find many references to mania and melancholia. He considered manic and melancholic states to be chronic conditions, although he admitted the possibility of recovery in some cases. Aristeas lived in the 2nd century of the Christian era, and he observed that young people are more susceptible to mania and older people to melancholia, and that although the two states are related, mania is not always an outcome of melancholia. See the interchange of terms now. It's kind of weird. He also described very well the religious, guilt-ridden, and self-sacrificing attitudes of the melancholic and the gay and overactive behavior of the manic. Change in language there as well. He reported how a severe case of melancholia, about whom many physicians were pessimistic, recovered fully after the patient had fallen in love. It's wild. A student of Sigmund Freud, here referred to just as Abraham, his pupil, in 1912, postulated that the factors that are prerequisites for manic depressive psychosis, bipolar disorder: 1, a constitutional and inherited over-accentuation of oral erotism. They did not define that, and I did not look it up, but it kind of seems to be in line with Freud's thinking. 2, a special fixation of the libido on the oral level. 3, a severe injury to infantile narcissism brought about by disappointments in love. So emotional upheaval. 4, the occurrence of this disappointment before the Oedipus complex was resolved. And 5, the repetition of the primary disappointment in later life. So people are getting disappointed, so they're getting depressed. Like, that's basically what he's saying. Disappointed in love and relationships and just emotionally, possibly sexually, it turns out. I don't know. And there's this other guy that they're quoting named Rado, which they don't give the first names of these people. It's bizarre. Melancholia is a despairing cry for love. The ego tries to punish itself in order to prevent the parental punishment. The patient attempts to repeat the sequence: guilt, atonement, forgiveness, which, according to Rado, is connected with a previous sequence occurring in the infant: awakening rage, hunger, appearance of the mother's breast, and ensuing satisfaction. It's very Freudian. It's wild. But this is in a psychiatry textbook. What's interesting about this, I find, is that there's so much more information about it than you'll find on the NIMH website, where they just say you need drugs. And that's it. They actually go into the history. They're trying to provide a full picture of what they know about it. Even if it's wrong, they're at least providing all the information that they can. And I have respect for that. They go into the psychoanalytic thought process, the existentialist school. Psychoanalytic was the Freud stuff, and then there's existentialists who study it totally differently from psychoanalytics. And then I have a 1985 textbook called The Modern Synopsis of Comprehensive Textbook of Psychiatry. So it's like a summary of a textbook, I guess. And that section of bipolar disorder is so much shorter, but it does still include a lot of history that echoes a lot of what we just went over in the 1960s textbook. It includes information from the DSM-III classifications of bipolar disorder. There's a whole section called Depression as a Normal Human Emotion. I find that very interesting because you don't see that in modern textbooks. You don't see that in later versions where they say you got to find out whether this is actually depression or if this is a disease, right? Differentiating between an emotional affect or the disease they believe exists, right? It's absolutely absurd to think about. It says, for the clinical psychiatrist, depression covers a wide range of changes in emotional states, ranging in severity from the normal mood fluctuations of everyday life to severe psychotic episodes. It's crazy, no pun intended. They say that affective disorders, like bipolar illness, it's so weird because they are actually referring to bipolar disorder as a disease in here. Like, they use the word disease and illness, which you don't see in later textbooks. You see disorder, because if they call it a disease, knowing full well that there's no evidence that it's actually a disease, then that could actually reveal that they don't know anything. It says that bipolar disorder, the onset is usually before the age of 30. For me, it was 30. They have inconclusive evidence that any childhood experiences can contribute to it. There's an increased risk with family history of bipolar illness, and that's because viruses are hereditary. It's more common among divorced persons. No shit. No shit. It says 2 genetic subgroups of bipolar disease may exist: a classical early onset group and a late onset group, Early onset would be the average age of 25 years. And then the late onset group would be average age of 39 years. Bipolar disorder has an early age of onset and late adolescence or before age 30. There's no conclusive evidence for any differences among blacks and whites. However, more blacks are hospitalized. First-degree relatives of bipolar patients show a lifetime risk of 25% for an affective disorder. Recurrence, 50 to 60% of patients who are in remission from bipolar disorder, like it's a cancer, will have another attack. Episodes usually recur every 3 to 9 years. And there's actually a typo. They said ever 3 to 9 years. Hashtag proofreading. This book has so much more information than you'll find in modern guides, and especially not in the DSM, right? The DSM is what's consulted by most psychiatrists in order to make a diagnosis, but it doesn't include all of this background information that is included in these older textbooks. It even says involvement of the endocrine system in depression has been suspected for many years. And that's absolutely true because viruses can infect that organ, the thyroid, which is a major part of the endocrine system, as is the liver, as is the adrenal system. It says many depressed patients exhibit hypersecretion of cortisol because they're stressed. It's very distressing to be depressed on your body. Even if you have nothing to do and you don't feel like doing anything, the stress of that feeling is incredibly powerful. And so your body oversecretes cortisol. And if you have a virus, the virus eats that cortisol and then you don't have it to lower your stress. And then you end up with anxiety. Yeah. So we've looked at the 1960s textbook. We've looked at the 1985 textbook. And then I have a copy of, the DSM-III-R, which is the revised version of the DSM-III. And that was published in 1987 by the American Psychiatric Association. So this came out the year I was born. I was born, according to these people, with bipolar disorder because it's lifelong, right? It means you're born with it. But you know what else is lifelong? Instances of viruses. And I know my mom had hepatitis, which is Epstein-Barr virus, and everybody has bugs, right? And those are passed on hereditarily. Heavy metals are passed on through contaminated eggs and sperm because they were given to people as a first course of treatment for many, many years in the form of mercury elixirs by regular doctors, who ironically were called quacks by the naturopathic type doctors. And it's interesting to see how where the money goes, the influence flows, because now the naturopaths are called quacks by the medical doctors who don't know the cause of anything that they're trying to treat. It's so backwards. So in the DSM-III-R, it says bipolar disorder, the initial episode that occasioned hospitalization is usually manic. In rare cases, over long periods of time, there's an alternation of the two kinds of episodes without any intervening period of normal mood. I don't know how they come up with that because they don't do studies. My guess is that when they voted in all these disorders, all the people in the room who are casting the votes were the ones saying, hey, sometimes I have patients who have both episodes and there's no normal mood. What's ironic about this text and confusing about this text is who defines what a normal mood is? There's no such thing as normal. There really isn't. Here's some statistics, which they're not real statistics. Like, where's your data? Like, how do you get to this estimate? It says the prevalence is estimated that from 0.4% to 1.2% of the adult population have had bipolar disorder. So they're saying they have had it. But I thought it was a lifelong illness. So which is it? It goes on for just another couple more pages with the diagnostic codes. It doesn't talk about treatment. The DSM is not meant to discuss treatment. The doctor just somehow knows what drugs to prescribe. They're probably under the influence of the drug companies, marketing to them saying, hey, here's this new drug for bipolar disorder. You can try your patients on it. It's basically just a guessing game. How many times, if you've been to a psychiatrist, have they said, we're going to try you on this, then we're going to bring you back after 6 weeks? That's how they guarantee their income. They diagnose you with something, try you on a drug, bring you back in 6 weeks, take you off the drug, put you on a different one, and your brain just gets damaged. Then you're basically beholden to that doctor. I have a book from Medical Medium here. It's called Thyroid Healing, The Truth Behind Hashimoto's, Graves' Insomnia, Hypothyroidism, Thyroid Nodules, and Epstein-Barr. I looked up bipolar in the back. It says in the section of stage 4 of Epstein-Barr, which is behind bipolar disorder. So many people in their teens and early 20s are dealing with the mystery symptoms such as fatigue, confusion, anxiety, depression, despondency, stomach aches, and racing thoughts. There was a time in my life where I had all of those at once. No wonder I was stressed. Sometimes these issues are ignored. Sometimes they're chalked up to adolescent angst, and sometimes they're tagged with labels such as ADHD, bipolar disorder, candida, or depersonalization. Prescriptions often accompany these diagnoses, though they often don't help because they're not addressing the true underlying viral issue. In a number of cases, young people are receiving misdiagnoses. What's really going on for so many of those who are suffering is stage 4 Epstein-Barr virus getting underway. With a misdiagnosis of ADHD, for example, raise your hand if that's you. What may really be going on for a given person is viral-caused brain fog and confusion that make it difficult to focus, alternating with racing thoughts and restlessness from EBV's neurotoxins. It's not ADHD proper, which is mercury-caused. It's similar with misdiagnoses of bipolar disorder. Someone may actually be experiencing periods of flatlining neurological fatigue and neurotoxin-induced depression, alternating with periods of intense activity that occur when the virus has abated a bit, giving the person just enough energy that viral anxiety kicks up to throw them into a flurry. Doesn't that make so much more logical sense to you than, oh, it's just your brain has a problem and you don't know about it until you're in your 30s. It's always been there and it's never going to go away. The explanation that medical science and what medical medium is describing is medical science. It's just not recognized as medical science because there hasn't been any more studies done on Epstein-Barr virus. So they think it's just mono, but now there's 60 strains of it and it affects all these organ systems. Slowly, more and more people are discovering the news as it trickles out. For example, you can look this up. Epstein-Barr virus has been linked to MS. And medical medium has known that for years. So as time goes on, what medical medium shares about all these disorders is hitting the news, very much like the SSRI study. So to wrap it up on the history and the evolution of bipolar, in the DSM-5, bipolar disorder was given its own category. So now it's not among mood and affective disorders. It's now a bipolar spectrum, very much like there's an autism spectrum now. And there's an ADHD spectrum. Basically allows more people to be diagnosed with it so more people can receive drugs. In the 2 decades following the publication of the DSM-IV, drug companies really took advantage of that opportunity and they advertised to us consumers that any elevation in mood or irritability that was mixed with a low mood was a sign you were bipolar. And the result meant tons of people were getting misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. There's definitely going to be more episodes on bipolar disorder, specifically the invention of childhood bipolar by Joseph Biederman. He's on my shit list. You will be fascinated by how that happened and how he got away with it. Fascinated and just probably taken aback and disgusted like I was. It just blows my mind. Maybe I'll do that for the next episode. We'll see. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been episode 8 of Misdiagnosed, the evolution of bipolar disorder. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to Misdiagnosed. If this show has helped you in any way, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. Sharing your experience will help others who are lost in the darkness find their own way out of the science of lies. Please note that while I may go in depth into medical topics and have acquired substantial medical knowledge, I am not a medical doctor. I'm a researcher. I'm a messenger of hope for other survivors of industrialized psychiatry. Because of how toxic psychiatric drugs are, it can be extremely dangerous, even life-threatening, to suddenly stop taking certain drugs. This is especially true for antidepressants, antipsychotics, and benzodiazepines. The longer you've taken the drug, the more dangerous withdrawal can be. If you want to heal your brain and soul naturally, the way it was designed to do, please seek the help of a compassionate and patient-centered physician to start the process of withdrawing from them as safely as possible. It will take time for your brain to reacclimate to life without the drugs, and there are doctors out there who will support you in your quest to save your brain. Never give up. You can heal.